everybody. How are you doing? Welcome to our show today. We've been on a little bit of a break because a certain someone had to move across a huge landmass. That person will remain nameless. Which reminds me, I'd like to introduce Carrie Barber. Good morning,
Good
Carrie.
morning, Andy. You say this like it was all my fault. And while it was, we had to do some technical work anyways. So, for those who are not familiar, we've reversed all of our technology and how we're streaming. So, bear with us. We're starting over from scratch yet again. And Andy's correct. I did move from Illinois. I am now in New Mexico. So, I made this great move during the second spike of COVID pandemic. So, we're trying to self isolate. And I got to tell you, we drove from Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, and down. And I can tell you based on my anecdotal experience, I know why we're in a second spike because to quote South Park, everybody was wearing the chin diapers. They were not practicing good PPE usage. Nobody was wearing a mask properly. Very few were. And of course, as we're traveling on the interstate, so were all the rest of these people and taking it home and with the risk. So, yeah, I have no doubt whatsoever that we're in a second. Some states are in a third spike. So, not at all surprised after that little jaunt. So that's what happened over the last 2 weeks and why we decided to take a hiatus. So today we're still working on some of the kinks, but we've reversed technology. So Andy's doing all the heavy lift with the stream and everything else, while I am sitting comfortably and just sending him all the information and letting him do it. But for those of you who recall from 2 long weeks ago, this is an interactive program and it's live. So if you send us comments, particularly on Twitter and Facebook, we will see them and we will address your comments, critiques. And to Keith, I know my lighting sucks, so don't even start.
Well, considering as well that it's like, what, 8:15.
Oh, it's 8:15 in the morning, and I don't have my pretty little glow light that makes it look like I'm not a vampire. so so I don't have the really good lighting. But yeah, I'm the pale kid in New Mexico. Everyone else is lovely and tan and golden. I'm yeah,
Yeah,
no.
and I don't think that's going to matter though, right? Like you're
Right.
you're still you know pale. You'll be pale your whole life. Like it doesn't matter. You're just gonna.
Oh, that is absolutely true. The first thing we did was go out and buy SPF 50 sunscreen so that I could, on occasion, venture outside. So, no, this will be great. It's totally great.
Yeah. So I just want to explain quickly, just because we've done this changeover fairly fast, and to facilitate you being able to see us and hear us, um, I'm pulling my audio directly off of my microphone. Everything else has got to go through Zoom. So uh, there is probably a noticeable delay in my video. Like my audio will precede my video. So don't worry. This was the only way to make it work real fast, and we'll figure it out and get it all fixed up for the next time. So it's it's just the way it is where it is. You're gonna have to grin and bear it for this show.
Yep, exactly. So, one of the things I found interesting where I was doing research on my new home state is New Mexico actually leads the country in income inequality. So, the poverty rate here, even among well paid workers, the inequality is so vast here, that New Mexico ends up being one of those states that relies heavily on federal funding, even though the governor here did an amazing job of taking COVID seriously. as early as December of last year, where the other states were still trying to figure out what the hell COVID was, and it wasn't the Corona Beer Company. She was doing stuff to make sure that people were safe and taking it seriously. And I can tell you, going from Illinois, which is considered a blue state, to New Mexico, when you drive into New Mexico, there are signs everywhere, PSAs, even on the highways, that remind you, please keep our hospitals safe, protect our nurses and doctors, do your part. And it's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. So even out walking the dogs around the block, everybody's wearing masks and things like that. So it's a vast difference between a state that has a very humble population, coming from Illinois, where the incomes, even though there is a inequality there, just the wealth and the privilege that allowed people to ignore it, say it's a hoax, all of these sort of things, and really tax the system with doctors and nurses. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the poverty report that came out. And this was something that came out. It was Columbia University, and it hit some of the news outlets over the last few days. But what it talked about was the relationship of poverty, income inequality, to the spike in COVID that we're seeing now. So we're calling it the second wave, but it may be the second of many, because we are not taking it seriously from an economic standpoint. So Andy, do you have that graphic up?
I do.
Okay. So this is the headline that people might have seen, and it talked about this study. And what is important here is it talks about how unemployment affected families across this country, right? So we know that there were 41% of Americans in the wealthiest nation in the world who were considered among in the poverty level, right? So these are working poor, disabled, veterans, all of these people fell into the poverty level. And because of COVID and the shutdown and unemployment, you had 8 million more people falling not just under the poverty level, but if you look at the study itself, deep poverty. So it's not just struggling to make ends meet, but they have very little hope of crawling out of the poverty level because they are so far down. And then in relation to that, you had the CDC finally come out and say, as part of the COVID, addressing COVID, we want you to stop evicting people because that's how it's going to spread. And you have some states that kind of took heed and others that didn't. So Illinois, again, one of the wealthiest states, was evicting people after water shutoffs. So if your utilities had gotten shut off, particularly water, you were getting evicted. And what you were doing is putting people further at risk. So all of these things are going into what we're seeing the second wave. And it makes sense because this study itself showed in April, when the CARES Act finally hit paychecks, and we had that $600 a week on unemployment, and you had the $1,200, which was a very small amount. When you had people getting those funds, and some, let's recall, still haven't gotten it, it helped to create a buffer so that families could at least, get by and try to stay shelter in place, self-isolate, that sort of thing. So when that all ended, this study shows unequivocally that families began to suffer and not just fall into poverty, but this second spike in the COVID is a direct result of what happened there. So while we have the headlines of like Sturgis, where the bikers decided that we're not going to be afraid, we're not going to be pussies, we're going to go have our party. Sturgis itself is responsible directly for 300 cases, and then all the others that came from it that we know of. But even that doesn't compare to the economics that have played a part in the second and in some cases third spike that we're seeing right now. So I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention because I think with the headlines that we have now with the Biden town hall and Trump's town hall, that is really getting lost. And in particular, one of the things that had come up was on Sunday, yesterday, Nancy Pelosi was talking about, she gave Republicans a 48-hour deadline to get the new heroes or whatever they're going to call it, to get something, a deal worked out. So if you recall, Andy and I talked about the deal that they were working on, and there was very little direct relief for working families and Americans across the board. Most of that was going to the Paycheck Protection Act. So what they're trying to do again is not necessarily support the American population, they're trying to support the economy, which the two are not the same, right? So if you're still of the mindset that the economy is a reflection of the stock market, stocks are doing just fine. I mean, Andy and I have talked about it. My penny stocks that I started with, my penny jar, it's doing great, phenomenal. Meanwhile, families across the country are really, really struggling. So, Andy, what's your take on it? Because you're in Canada, you're watching the dumpster fire.
Well, the problem is that when you look at this whole situation, you trying to take a step back and look what's happening, and especially if you have an understanding of what's happened in other countries, right? As far as how they protected their own people, and you know made it possible for people that aren't working or that have lost income to keep that income, and stay in their homes and deal with the problems of a pandemic rather than the economic problems that it brings. You just see how ludicrous the response is that the American government has done, right? Because the whole thing, when you think about it, you've got 8 million Americans that are slipping into poverty because of this, right? Now these are all people that are going to be reliant on the system in other ways, right? So, like, I mean, they're going to be reliant on food stamps or food banks or whatever means they can get their hands on to survive, right? So the American government is paying for these people one way or another, right? And we know this, we've seen this, that this is the way it works, right? So if you're going to do that, then the question becomes, well, why put people through the pain and suffering of having to go through this before they can get support instead of just supporting them right off the bat? And the answer is that it's because of political games, right? It's because there's an election coming up and people are trying to score political wins as opposed to helping people. And that is infuriating. I mean, when you think about that it's more important for politicians to get political wins and use this as as a way to promote your party or your side, right, at the expense of people that are going hungry, right? That's ridiculous, and it's mind-boggling, right?
Well, I think this is a really good example. Good is not the right word, but a very telling example of politicians like Pelosi and, let's be honest, Mitch McConnell, the folks who have been there long enough to know better, who are catering to the donor class, right? So if you are struggling to pay a utility bill, Pelosi's not talking to you, and she's certainly not going to address the policies and excuse me, I got that. The policies that you need right now. So they're going to focus, we saw it. They focused on Wall Street. They didn't focus on Main Street. And, when you look around, it doesn't matter where you live, look around your town and you can see the number of businesses that are struggling. So I cannot fault a restaurant who is struggling to try and reopen and has inside dining because they don't know what else to do. You can only fulfill so many takeout orders, right? So they're putting their employees at risk, they're putting their community at risk, trying to survive because no one else is helping them. And it's just kind of a catch-22 that we're facing right now. So
Oh,
um,
absolutely. And there was one thing that I wanted to talk to you about because it reared its head here just a couple of days ago. And if you know me or heard me talk about this before, I've been a staunch volunteer for the Canadian Cancer Society for the last 16, 17 years, right? And it was instigated because my father got cancer. But regardless of that, when the pandemic hit, um, any of the Cancer Society offices all had to be shut down, right? Back in March when everything was in lockdown, right? And so that organization going forward had to figure out how to do business virtually and continue to try to raise money because just because we're in the middle of a pandemic doesn't mean that people stop getting cancer, right? And or whatever the thing is. So I had this long conversation with the office, the city office director. She called to tell us about the restructuring. All these people that I've worked with for years are now, working virtually on a national level, and my new contact is going to be someone I don't know or where they're even from. So that's a very interesting development. But we're talked about the whole situation as far as nonprofits or charities are concerned, right? And even in Canada, we've reached out to help people that lost their jobs, that lost income, students that couldn't get summer jobs because of the pandemic, seniors and medical people and all of small businesses and all of these people. But there was zero money in that pot for charities and nonprofits. And if your society is structured in a capitalist society where you're relying on the general public to fund critical things like cancer research, which is a whole other show we could go into, right? Then you have to at least make these charities whole in some way because of the lost income. If people are afraid to donate, or you can't even hold events because of the
right.
pandemic, and there was literally not a cent given to charities, right?
Right. And how many years? I mean, Andy, you and I both grew up with it where you had conservatives who continually said, let the charities handle it, right? That's not the job of government to do that. Let the charities handle it, as if we are not the charities, right? Like you said, we're funding charities out of our own pockets. But when you have that income inequality and then these disasters, like let's focus on Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. Pelosi had there's homelessness throughout her entire district. On top of that, you had these massive fires, and then COVID, and all of these things hitting her district. Where was she? Right. So she was still politicking and making concessions and, doing performative things. And on the flip side of that, you had Mitch McConnell. To your point, what incentive does Mitch McConnell have to take up the gauntlet that Pelosi herself has thrown down about this 48-hour deadline? Well, elections have consequences, right? And we saw that Booker's challenge in the primary was defeated, and Dems were complicit when they did not push back on one polling place in Louisville because it benefited them. And then we saw the other gentleman, I forget his name, but he is a radio host personality out of Kentucky. And he had thought to put his hat in that race in the primary and went to DC to meet with Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer didn't really know who he was or who the players were, but he liked Amy McGrath because she was really good at fundraising for the DNC. So he was, follow the money and wanted McGrath in. So now we have this race in Kentucky where Amy McGrath, who is a carpetbagger, someone who is not from the area, move in just for the election, who has cited pro Trump policy, who is basically a Republican light.
That's a stretch.
What?
I would say more Republican, like maybe maybe not full strength Republican, but certainly more than Republican light.
All right, I'll take it. And that's really subjective. So wherever you think she falls, she's definitely not. She's more of a dino than her challenges were in the primary. So in this race, she is falling behind. Now she's great on fundraising. Schumer had her for that. But when it comes to polling, and if we believe the polling, it doesn't look good. So what incentive does Mitch McConnell have to cater to his own people? So this morning, I really challenged Andy by adding yet another graphic that I wanted to share with everyone. But this is a graphic about the income inequality and those states that rank the highest. Kentucky is on the list, but unfortunately, my new home state is top of the list. So, what this means is these states are paying in taxes and getting more back from the federal government. But I want to make a distinction here. Just because they're getting dollars back from the federal government does not necessarily mean the people are getting it. These are dollars that could be going to military spending. These can be going to other government funded programs or military bases, as in the situation with Kentucky. So Mitch McConnell has this reputation of saying one thing and then making sure federal dollars come pouring into the state of Kentucky that benefit his donors, in particular the military bases and other industries. That if you go out and look at who's funding him, Open Secrets is a wonderful resource where you can pull up the data that's drawn from the FEC filings. You can see who Mitch McConnell's catering to and who is supporting him. So what incentive does he have to do anything but laugh at Pelosi right now, who has put down this 48-hour timeline to get a new program in place to help the little people in Kentucky? And what I found that was interesting in Kentucky, when you talk about income inequality, the top 20% make 12 times more than the average working person or those who have now fallen into poverty. So their disparity in incomes alone is pretty significant. Mitch McConnell's working for those top tier people, and they're very happy with him, which is why he's been there for 32 years, right? So, so it doesn't look good for McGrath. And even people who might be voting Biden are not necessarily supporting McGrath either, those down ballot races. So that one's going to be a challenge. And I think the only thing that gives me a slight bit of hope is there was a report that Pelosi was on the phone with Steve Mnuchin, your favorite guy, Andy.
By a vowel.
Yeah, for about an hour. And so for those who don't know, Steve is now running the Fed. And he was the guy during the last CARES Act who had a small conference room in, I want to say the Hart Building, or it may be in the Capitol building itself, who's pulling in Congress people to explain to them how federal appropriations actually work, right? So whenever they said, how do we pay for it? In some cases, they were outright lying. In other cases, like my old congressman, Sean Casten, he really didn't know what the federal appropriations process worked, even though he had been elected to Congress. So Steve Mnuchin was bringing them in to tell them that, yeah, no, taxes don't fund these programs. We don't need to collect taxes first to send out dollars. We can just open the banks for Wall Street and promise them $1 trillion a day, and it's totally okay. So I at least know that Mnuchin knows how it works. And when he was on the phone with Pelosi, I am hoping that part of that conversation was about funding programs for people, just regular people, not necessarily Wall Street, small businesses, regular people. We'll see.
Well, that's a thing, right? Like, I mean, it's as excuse me, as reprehensible as a person is, as Steve Mnuchin, the foreclosure king of the great financial crisis,
Mhm.
right? That's at least he understands how federal financing works and can probably see, the results of this posturing and how horrible things are going to get in the United States over this winter if there isn't any help, right?
You would think, and this is why I have been nervous for over a year, and we always laugh at that hashtag eat the rich, but it's getting serious. I mean, when you have families who are homeless, this is a personal thing that happened to me. So our move was pretty quick. It was from beginning to end to where we are now is about 3-4 weeks, which is pretty fast to pick up and move across country. So what we found is we could not get in line to rent a property unless we were physically here. So that was the first part. Second part, and this is the one that I'm personally offended by, and I want to do some more research. When you apply to rent an apartment or a house or something like that, there is a fee, an administrative fee, and they tell you that this fee is for background checks and whatever else. So every property you look at, let's say you're looking at 4 or 5 properties, and if they're managed by different companies, you pay 4 or 5 fees, anywhere from $35 to $60 per application. So now, when you have so many people who have been displaced looking for homes, apartments, homes, whatever, you are now in line with 20 other people. So you're filling out an application, paying this fee every time with no guarantee that you will even get a call back. So, how dare you be impoverished and not be able to afford even to apply for housing?
Yes, let's take stock of this and realize that people just got evicted from their place of living because they didn't have any money to pay their rent. Now, to get a new place to live, you have to come up with money to pay the fee.
That's exactly right. And then your eviction now follows you like an albatross. So here you may be, a single person, married, kids, whatever. You now have this albatross, plus you've got all these extra fees, and it takes far too long. Like, just try to get your license, your driver's license renewed right now during this pandemic. People are waiting in lines 4 to 6 hours long. Now imagine that you're trying to apply for Section 8 housing, emergency housing, benefits like that. Can you imagine how long that takes? And at the same time, we still see the headlines where people are being chased out of parks. Their last resort is a tent or a temporary structure in a park, and they're being chased out of the public park, right? So this is the where I want to focus at, not necessarily Trump or Biden or whatever, but the people who are actually making policy in Congress. These are the people that need to be held accountable, because the states themselves cannot create money. The federal government can, and they can fund these programs at will, but they don't have the will to do so. And so
Right.
this is why I believe that we need to shift our focus to the people who are actually in Congress. And I don't care whether they wear a red or blue jersey, maybe even a green or independent. We need to be at their houses, at their offices, and we need to be talking to them. I don't want to see another women's march. I don't want to see another march on Washington. I want you to be at their offices, because these are the people who make the rule, and these are the people who set the votes. Make them uncomfortable. Now, I'm not advocating violence, But I'm saying let's put the responsibility where it lies. They're supposed to be your representative. They're not a celebrity. They're not better than you. They don't have any magical powers that you don't already have. They're supposed to serve you. And in this time of dire need, pandemic, and then, oh, by the way, we still have this climate thing going on right on the heels of all of this. So we were warned that there would be new dire diseases, new economic implications like fire everywhere, water. And oh, by the way, 45% of the United States, 45% from West Coast to East Coast is now in a severe drought. I don't know how much more dire this could be before people start paying attention, right? So,
Especially with the winter coming too,
oh,
right? Like, the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous, and I can't understand why there isn't pushback on this. Why people aren't concerned with this, right? Well, I realize that mainstream media isn't covering any of this, right? That's more appropriate to show Trump at rallies, right? Because I guess it gets more viewers. But like, I mean, we just recently did a podcast with Raul Carrillo from the Modern Money Network, and we talk about federal financing and the MMT and how the federal government can never be insolvent, right? And the importance that they attach to funding certain things, right? Because the United States is a currency issuer, it's not a currency user, but each one of the 50 states is a currency user. They don't have their own currency. They can't print their own money, or they can't keystroke money into existence. That has to be done on the federal level. Well,
right.
we talk about this in terms of what's important to fund on the federal level and what isn't. And if the government decides that something is important to fund, it does it itself, right? If it doesn't, it puts it in the purview of the state. And then the state has to raise revenue through taxes because it's a currency user, right? And so then it gets underfunded or not funded at all because they're relying on tax revenue to fund things. And so that's when we see what the difference is, what the emphasis that the federal government puts on programs that they want funded and what they don't want funded. And that's very telling, right? Like if you're looking to the states for programs, it's because the federal government didn't necessarily want them.
That's exactly right. And I have been remiss in saying good morning to Chris, Chandali, Joel. Good morning. Thank you for weighing in. I just really wanted to read this comment from Joel, who, okay, it reads like, sorry, that was my cat. It reads like Joel's a cynic. However, I think he's right. He says people aren't concerned because of the mentality, as long as I got mine, is still pervasive in our culture. And he's right about that, right? So this is a lesson I think we can learn from COVID, where you had the number of people who said it was a hoax, or I don't believe in it, or it's a Democratic conspiracy, and then they got it, or someone close to them got it and died or suffered long-term effects. Then they started to get it. So it's part of the human condition where unless it affects us directly, we're just not going to understand or give it the credence that it really deserves. And the same thing happens with this economic downturn. But here's the thing, most people are feeling it, right? Unless you're making over 400,000 a year, and you still might be feeling it a little bit, but most people are feeling it. It's that pressure, the angst, the anxiety. It's getting harder to make ends meet. Your mortgage keeps going up, your taxes keep going up. And then even on your ballot, you have questions where, like, I just cast my ballot in Illinois because I'm still a resident for the next 60 days because of election laws. And one of the questions there was, in Illinois, are you going to amend the Constitution to go away from a flat tax to a graduated tax based on income? So in my situation, I was looking at the difference between a salary in Illinois and a salary in New Mexico who has a graduated tax. And what I found, which was surprising, is that same hourly rate in New Mexico, you end up with a pay raise of at least $2,000 because in New Mexico, with their graduated level, you have the higher incomes paying their fair share into the state coffers. It's not the flat tax. So in Illinois, what was happening during this election is you had those higher income people and the PACs put out a lot of misinformation, like saying that the governor himself could just write in a tax increase. And a lot of people were buying that bullshit and completely ignoring that no, it's your state legislature that has to do this, and these are your representatives, and this is how you participate. They missed all of that. So Illinois, it's likely that that ballot initiative will fail because so much money was poured in from the higher incomes to keep that flat tax. So this is part of where, Andy and I have been trying to educate people. And Andy, let's share the event that you did with Raul, because he's a wonderful individual, and I think I think people would benefit from listening to his take on it, especially from he's in Madrid. Is that correct?
No, he's from the Modern Money Network. He lives in New York City. He's
Okay.
a lawyer that works with nonprofits and other
Okay.
things. Yeah, yeah. You may remember Raul from the MMT conference at the
Yeah,
conference.
there were so many people. I remember Raul meeting him,
What we'll
and
do is, yeah, I'll place the link to the podcast that we did
okay.
in the comments after we're done.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great information for everyone to know. So that was largely what I wanted to talk about this morning. We're going to expand on this as things go forward, because this is a very serious issue that is only going to get worse unless we all start to understand the root cause of it and how it affects everything. But for our first show back after a 2-week hiatus, not a vacation, we were still working very hard, but just wanted to let's cut through all the nonsense while the networks are focusing on the dog and pony show bullshit. Let's talk about the serious issues and how things affect you, your community, and all the people that you care most about, from the Main Street level all the way up to Congress, and what things you should be paying attention to right now. So I'm happy to be back, and with all of the kinks that we had to work out, still a few more to go. But Andy, great job running this one. Did good.
Oh, thank you so much.
Right. So we will definitely be back on Wednesday with your comments, questions, critiques, and if there's a topic that you want us to cover, or you yourself want to talk about, send us a message, post a comment, and we'll bring you on. If I can get up earlier, so can you. So with that, we have a couple programs coming on. We've got a new article coming out by a wonderful journalist and author, Mr. Romney, and that will be posted on our website shortly. And then Miss Sherry Weiss did a 2-part series. We want to post that and invite Miss Sherry to come in and talk about all the stuff that she's written about. And she's a wonderful advocate for MMT and some good policy that actually helps people. So she's got a wonderful take on a number of different topics. So we want to share that here too. So that's it for me. Andy, you got anything else?
I just want to just mention again that apparently the new American pastime is vote shaming, but that's a whole other show. We can get into that later. But stop if you're advocating for Biden. Vote for who you want.
Right.
That's the democracy, right? Like, however you've figured it out in your own mind and what's important to you, and how you think you should vote, that's fine. But stop telling people that want to vote third party or don't want to lose their voting power that a vote for Howie is a vote for Trump, because it's just not true. You don't know everybody's situation, and that's not how democracies work. One person, one vote. Leave people alone.
Oh, that's it exactly, and especially when we still have the electoral college. If you're going to vote shame somebody, make sure you understand where they actually live and how many votes their state gets in the electoral college. So if they're voting in a state like, I don't know, like me, Illinois, where my vote wasn't going to change the outcome of a damn thing, and you try to vote shame me, it's not going to go your way. Right. So it's you're showing your own ignorance in the democratic process by trying to vote shame somebody when they have every right to vote who they want to. It's their vote. And especially when we have this buffer of the electoral college. If you do not understand how that works, how many votes your electors get in your state, probably not your place to critique anyone else either.
Right.
So.
Right. People have different levels of understanding what's important to them, right? Despite how much knowledge you think you have, you don't have it all, and everybody's life is different. Everybody's choices are different, and based on those life choices, people are going to vote the way they want to vote. You can tell people how you're going to vote, but to critique other people's votes isn't fair, because you're not taking their life experiences into consideration and what's important to them. And that's what democracy is about. So stop vote shaming.
Excellent point, Andy, and thank you so much. We need to hear it yet again. So, all right. So from me here in lovely New Mexico, the land of enchantment, to Andy Kennedy, Canada,
the land of ice.
Right. I'm gonna go enjoy my 80-degree day today. So, be thinking about you, Andy.
I hope you get all sweaty.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll see you back here bright and early on a Wednesday. Thank you.
Sounds good. Let's take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
We about that, ayy. We in the zone. We out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog. We keep it G. Whoa.